Hey traders, hope everyone's doing well. Sorry I haven't been able to post in a few weeks. I was out of town during the Thanksgiving holidays and was busy trying to get the Discord group started up, so I just didn't really have time to do any videos. I did keep up with my spreadsheets though. So I'm going to talk through the last 2 weeks of November since I didn't make videos for those, and then recap the entire month. I'm not going to go through every trade, I'll just go through some of the highlights. These first trades are for the week ending November the 20th. You also see I removed those two columns at the end of my spreadsheet where I would typically show how much it would have cost me to close the position if I didn't roll it, as well as what it would cost to close the position at its current price. I didn't really have time to go look up all those prices. It's kind of time consuming for me to go back and look up what those prices would have been when I'm rolling a trade, or to look up what the closing price was at the end of the week. So I just let those off. And it doesn't really matter anyway, because all these trades that I'm rolling for the last 2 weeks of November, I have closed them out in December. So when I do my December recap, at some point you'll be able to see what the profit and loss was that I realized on those particular trades. So there's no trade in the month of November that I'm still rolling. I've closed out all the trades that I was rolling in November. So anyway, it just didn't make sense to include those two columns because that's old information and it's no longer applicable. So the first trade here is RKT. Just wanted to quickly point it out. So initially, I had sold the 21 strike put in RKT, and I ended up getting assigned shares. I went ahead and let it get assigned as opposed to rolling it. So I was assigned long shares of 21. Let's go down a few trades to this KSS trade. So this was Kohl's. Kohl's reported their earnings and shot up after earnings. So I thought there could be a pullback. So I decided to go ahead and sell the 28.5 call. Plus I thought retail may have some pullback as well just because of the spike in COVID cases at the time. And I was wrong, and KSS started going up, so I ended up rolling it the very next day. I rolled it out to the 29 strike price. And you can see that I also sold the 29 call, so I turned it into a straddle. So by having the call and the put at the same strike price, it became a straddle. And I did that to bring in some extra credit to offset the loss that I was incurring on the call side. And actually, I wish I hadn't have rolled it at the time, because it did end up coming back down and closing right around my strike price. It was pretty close to 28.5, I think, by the end of that week. But I went ahead and rolled it, and we'll see in the next week what happened with that trade. Coming down, WSM, that was an earnings play, so I did a strangle on that one. Had a nice profit on that one, 540. BABA was one that I had been continuing to roll, and I eventually closed BABA out in the month of December. Amazon, that was a credit spread that I had been rolling. Well, I just rolled it the one time and had to widen the strikes, and was able to get out of that for $660. On SPX, I had originally done a 0 DTE iron condor, and I ended up having to roll the call side because SPX shot up above my strike prices. And then I decided to go ahead and close it out and just take the loss because it was still above my strike prices on that Monday. So you can see I took an $1,800 loss on this particular trade by closing it out. EA was one that I had been rolling just a couple contracts because I had initially closed out some of my EA contracts the week prior, but I still had 3 contracts that I continued to roll. I was able to close that out for a small profit. And then the PayPal trade, I was continuing to roll it. So you can see I still had a decent profit that week. I had a profit of $2,045, even though I had that $1,800 loss in SPX. So it still turned out to be a pretty good week. All right, let's jump into the next week. So this would be the last week of November, ending November the 27th. So here's that RKT trade again. So like I mentioned before, I was assigned those 21 shares. So what I did, I ended up selling a covered call on that. I sold the 20.5 covered call to bring in some credit. So I initially had sold 9 contracts, and I tried to roll all 9 contracts to the next week because the stock was above my strike price. And you can see that only 2 of the contracts filled. So I was able to roll 2 of those contracts to the week of 12/4. So the other 7 contracts, those expired. And I ended up selling calls for them that next week, which again, I would cover in my December recap. And as of last week, I'm out of this RKT trade altogether anyway. TOL and PTON, those are trades that I was having to roll as well, but I'll eventually close those out in December. SPX, that was a 0 DTE trade that worked out, made $525 on that one. Here's an Amazon put spread that worked out well. And this is a trade that I've actually been doing pretty much every week. If you're in my Discord group, I've been putting this trade on every Friday. Okay, here's the KSS trade. So I eventually decided to go ahead and close it out for a loss. So you can see I closed out the call side and took a $2,315 loss on the call. But by adding that put side, it helped offset it because I made $820 on the put. So combined, that was a total loss of $1,495. And so, I'm a big advocate of rolling, but I also believe that if your viewpoint, if your thesis changes on why you got into a position, then it's best to go ahead and close it out and take the loss. So initially, the reason I got into this trade was because I thought KSS was going to pull back after the run up after earnings. I thought retail in general may cause it to pull back. Since that didn't happen and it kept running up, I wasn't comfortable holding this position because there was still a lot of room for it to move up based off of its high before COVID. And I just didn't want to take the risk of it continuing to run up. And like I said, the reason for me getting into it was no longer applicable. So I decided to go ahead and close it and take the loss. So just keep that in mind, that if whatever your reason is for getting into the stock, if that changes, that's the time you should just go ahead, bite the bullet, and take the loss. And vice versa, if a stock goes against you pretty quickly, like I'm in a trade right now that I'm sure most of you are aware of in Splunk, that has moved against me several points in the money, but I didn't close it out for a loss because my thesis on the stock hasn't changed. I still think the stock will recover eventually and get back above my strike price. And so I'm still confident in holding the positions. Also, you shouldn't just blindly close your position out of fear. If it moves against you and you don't have any reason to close it other than just you're scared, being scared is not a valid reason to close it. You should have a legitimate reason, like in this case of Kohl's, I had a legitimate reason why I felt like I should close the position, not just because I was necessarily scared. I just felt like that the reason for me getting into the position was no longer valid, and because of the fact it did have a lot of room to continue in running up. So just keep that in mind, that, don't necessarily get married to a trade and continue rolling it if you feel like that the reason you got into it is no longer a valid reason. But then also don't necessarily just close out trades blindly unless you have a valid reason to do so. BABA, I continued rolling it, and I was rolling it for a debit just so I could get it down another strike price. And then the PayPal that I had been rolling for a while, I was finally able to close it out. So for the last week in November, I had a profit of $2,985. So again, it was still a good week, even considering the loss that I had to take on Kohl's. So for the entire month of November, you can see it ended up being a really good month. I made a total of $13,341 for the 4 weeks of November. And when we look at that now for year to date, from the time that I started providing the trade alerts, I've had a total profit of $77,901. So even though in November I had a couple big losses, right, with Kohl's and with that SPX trade, it still was one of my top months. It was, I guess, my third best month. August was my best month, and then October and November were pretty close together. And October was a 5-week month. So really, on a weekly basis, my November ended up being better. So far, December is looking pretty good as well. For December, I'll probably just wait and do a recap at the end of the month as opposed to doing it for every week. I'll probably just go ahead and do it for the month. And then hopefully I can do a yearly overview as well, just to show you guys the results for the year, how many trades I took, what my biggest drawdowns were, things like that. I'll try to put together that as well. And then maybe in January, I can start back doing this on a weekly basis. Hopefully I'll have some more time then to get back in a routine of posting these every week like I've been doing in the past. So you probably won't see any more videos from me until the end of the year, but just know that I'm still around, I'm still trading. Hopefully you guys are getting my email alerts or in the Discord group and are still following the trades. If you have any questions, let me know. Thanks.